You probably think a broken bone in the ancient world meant a slow, certain death. No cast, no surgery, no antibiotics, game over. That's the assumption almost everyone makes. It's also completely wrong. Skeletons found across every continent tell a very different story. People surviving fractures that should have killed them and living for decades afterward. Let's start with how common this actually was. Injury wasn't rare in the ancient world. It was the norm. In 1995, anthropologists Thomas Berger and Erich Trinkaus analyzed dozens of Neanderthal skeletons and found trauma almost everywhere they looked, especially in the upper body, shoulders, arms, skulls. Some researchers estimate that as many as 80 to 95% of Neanderthals suffered a serious injury at some point before they died. Berger and Trinkaus noticed something else too. The injury pattern looked eerily similar to modern rodeo riders, people who get thrown, gored, and stomped by large animals at close range. Their theory: Neanderthals weren't throwing spears from a safe distance. They were getting in close, wrestling animals many times their size, and paying for it with broken bones on a regular basis. Living this way wasn't a tragedy that happened to a few unlucky individuals. It was baked into daily life. Hunting animals at close range with hand-thrown or handheld weapons meant getting hurt over and over was simply part of the job description. So if injury was constant, survival had to be systematic. This wasn't luck. It was a skill set. In 2020, researchers led by Dr. Hila May at Tel Aviv University published a study on a foot bone recovered from Manot Cave in northern Israel, dated to roughly 36,000 to 38,000 years ago. CT scans showed the person had suffered what's now called a Lisfranc fracture, a serious midfoot injury that today still requires 6 to 12 weeks in a cast with zero weight on the limb. It's named after Jacques Lisfranc de Saint-Martin, a French surgeon who first documented the injury in a cavalryman who ended up losing part of his foot to amputation. This ancient patient had no cast, no modern medicine, and the bone had healed cleanly. According to the research team, that kind of healing doesn't happen by accident. Someone likely immobilized the foot with a splint made from bone or wood, and for weeks, maybe months, this person contributed nothing to hunting or gathering. They couldn't have even hopped very far on a makeshift crutch without agony. The group fed them anyway. As one of the researchers put it, this wasn't just a medical event. It was a window into how deeply cooperative these communities actually were. And it wasn't a one-off. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, researchers found a Neanderthal known as Shanidar I, who lived to around 50 years old despite a withered, partially amputated arm, blindness in one eye, and hearing loss from an old head injury. By Paleolithic standards, that's remarkably old, and every one of those disabilities should have made him easy prey and a burden the group had no evolutionary reason to carry. He survived anyway. A similar case turned up in La Chapelle-aux-Saints, Saints, France. A Neanderthal who lived with severe arthritis and tooth loss, so extensive he likely needed food prepared for him just to eat. Neither of these men could hunt in their final years. Neither of them died alone. This kind of care goes back even further than Neanderthals. In 2005, archaeologist David Lordkipanidze and his team reported a 1.77 million-year-old skull found in Dmanisi, Georgia, belonging to an early human ancestor who had lost every tooth but one, long before death. The empty sockets had healed over with bone, which means this person survived for years afterward, unable to chew raw meat or tough plant food without help. Somebody was softening food, or chewing it first, for a person who couldn't do it themselves. A separate case, found in the Cima de los Huesos bone pit in Spain's Atapuerca Mountains, shows something similar in a child. The roughly 400,000-year-old skull belonged to a girl who died around age 11, and her skull shows signs of a condition where the bones of the skull fuse too early, putting damaging pressure on a growing brain. That kind of condition typically comes with cognitive and motor difficulties. She survived almost to adolescence anyway. This wasn't a fluke of one unusually kind group. It shows up again and again in different species, in children and adults, on different continents, separated by well over 1 million years. Here's the part that's easy to miss. None of this required medicine the way we think of it. It required something simpler and, in some ways, harder to pull off: consistency. Someone had to remember to bring this person food every single day. Someone had to reset a splint that slipped. Someone had to carry water to a person who couldn't walk to the stream themselves for weeks, sometimes for years. There was no calendar to mark the healing timeline, no discharge date to look forward to. In a world with no writing, no schedules, no reminders, that kind of sustained care wasn't automatic. It was a choice the group kept making day after day, long after the injury stopped being interesting or urgent, long after the novelty of tending to someone had worn off completely. The actual technique mattered too. By the time you get to ancient Egypt, the evidence turns from inference into something you can hold in your hands. In 1903, archaeologist G. Elliott Smith excavated the site of Naga ed Der and found limbs that had been splinted with wooden boards, wrapped tightly in linen bandages, almost exactly the logic behind a modern cast. One splinted forearm even had a wad of vegetable fiber pressed into the wound, likely to stop the bleeding, a rough but functional version of a dressing pad. The Egyptians didn't stop at splints either. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from around 1534 BCE, describes willow bark and leaf treatments for pain and swelling. Willow bark contains a compound called salicin, the same basic chemical family that eventually became aspirin thousands of years later. Further back than any of that, Neolithic remains show fractures splinted with nothing more than bark and sticks bound in place. The materials were primitive. The underlying idea wasn't. Immobilize the break, manage the pain, protect it from movement, wait. That's still the first step of fracture treatment today. So put it together. Injury was constant. Hunting itself was practically guaranteed to hurt you eventually. Survival depended on being fed, protected, and physically stabilized by other people for weeks or months at a time, with no guarantee the group would get anything back for the effort. And yet, again and again, across tens of thousands of years and multiple human species, the skeletons show healing. Not perfect healing. Limbs often set crooked, healed short, left people with a permanent limp. But healing all the same. Survival, not perfection, was the actual bar. Then medicine arrived, and it didn't just get better at fixing bones. It quietly took over a job that used to belong to the whole group. X-rays let you see the break instead of guessing at it. Anesthesia meant setting a bone no longer had to be a battle. Surgical pins and plates replaced sticks and bark. Casts replaced someone's constant, hands-on attention. Every one of these was a genuine improvement, and nobody's arguing for a return to bark splints. But something happened alongside all that progress. Care that used to be distributed across an entire community, shared, expected, unquestioned, got centralized into a single building you visit for 6 weeks and then leave. A cast doesn't need to be fed. A cast doesn't need company. A cast just needs to stay dry and stay on, and modern fracture care is quietly built around that fact, efficient, precise, and largely solitary. Which means the real difference between then and now isn't really about whether the bone heals. Bones have always mostly healed, one way or another. The difference is who's responsible for you while it does. Your ancestor with a broken leg had an entire group quietly rearranging its whole day around keeping him alive. You have a follow-up appointment. For most of human history, a broken bone wasn't just a medical event. It was a test of whether the people around you actually meant it when they called you one of their own, whether the group would keep feeding a mouth that couldn't hunt, keep protecting a body that couldn't fight, for as long as it took. And for hundreds of thousands of years, across cave floors in Iraq, Israel, Georgia, and France, the bones keep giving the same quiet answer. They did.